Hello, welcome to this interview. I'm Laurence Buxton. I'm interviewing a friend, Joe Wilson from Scotland. Joe likes sci-fi, horror and fantasy. He's got his site on YouTube, Divas, Dinosaurs and Demons, which is a bit of a tongue twister. And that gives a good idea, I think, of his interests. So this is just a brief interview where I'm just going to talk to him about his interests, areas in common and different influences. So welcome, Joe.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for sparing the time this windy Tuesday evening. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, what initially inspired you to take up writing?
As I've said before, it was just really it began when I was young. I enjoyed playing with my toys and so on, like anyone else. But I would often actually come up with like little stories for them to act out rather than just make them chase each other. And I guess I never grew out of that. I mean, I grew out of playing with toys, but I never grew out of playing with that. And when I was in my 20s, I actually realised, that this isn't just something I do to amuse myself. I would actually like to try and do it properly. And so that's really where it began. But honestly, I can't trace even the exact moment where I thought, okay, I want to be a writer. It did kind of happen gradually. It was a very slow burn.
Yes, as we said in the dry run, I find that the imagination gets fired as a child, almost plucking things out of the air, isn't it? And then it's acquiring the discipline and the structure later on, which is the difficult part. That can take decades sometimes. Although I do find that ideas still come out of the air for myself. I don't know about what it's like.
Oh yeah, definitely. The problem actually is thinking up too many ideas. You have to be very, I was terrible for this, starting too many new things at once. You have to be a bit more disciplined. You can't let it all just be your imagination, takes you to, I'll do this, I'll do that. That's been a big problem for me.
Yeah, it's a discipline thing, isn't it? Of you're halfway through an idea, you come up with another idea, and then the temptation is to try to do two at once, or park one and do the other, isn't it? And then it's you could end up with two half-finished ideas, or sometimes even
10.
10 ideas, and you end up taking little bits of each, and they all get together in one idea, which is something that I'm currently doing at the moment to some extent. The second question. Obviously, I mentioned sci-fi at the beginning. Doctor Who appears on your site, notably the Fire of the Daleks, which would be of interest to anyone who likes the show. Would you say it's closer in style to the old show, which ran from 1963 to 1989, or the new one, which Russell T Davies has come back and has run since 2005?
Yeah, well, obviously, I've said this many times in forums and other things. As I said, I don't hate the revival completely. I just don't think it ever worked as a sequel to the original. It was basically a remake that contained a few references to the original to try and link it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a totally different show. So basically the only reason I did it was because I thought, wouldn't it be good if there was actually a modern, updated version of the classic one? I mean, I'm not saying, I can do a story like Robert Holmes or anything, but I can at least try and do, a more modern version of the classic era. So yeah, it's definitely more in that style. It's a serialized story. The Doctor's, more of a kind of maverick scientist rather than this, tortured angel-esque hero goes around getting off with young girls or whatever the hell he is now in the Gucci Gatwa era. I mean, that's what they can't even. Like, they won't even stay consistent within themselves, never mind in regards to the original. David Tennant's Doctor was a sex machine getting off with Billy Piper and Through My Eyes. Yes. But then, just a few years later, they make out, he was always gay. So it's like, I wanted, like, the classic era to have a more consistent core character to the Doctor. So that's what's present in my series as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea that everybody seems to look at it in a different way. So there's, as you say, certain showrunners look at it as if it was always something that that is now, and the tone is very different. But as you say, if you look back at Robert Holmes and the ones I grew up with on the old VHSs, it couldn't be more different in many ways, could it? I mean, it had almost a horror feel to it, like the Terror of the Zygons was one, just to pick one out of the air, and yeah, totally different.
I think I wanted mine to be a bit darker as well, because I think another problem I've had with the revival in the last few years, it's got a bit too light. I mean, I did see those two on Saturday. It was like a panto, to be honest. I mean, with the doctor saving the monster and the wee kids. I mean, my one, because maybe I went too far in making it, too violent the other way, because obviously I'm not held back. But yeah, that was one thing. I wanted to return to the horror of it.
Yeah, I read some of your work, and I read one of your introductions to one of your ideas, and yeah, you certainly got the horror. You certainly got the fanged monsters rather than the cuddly monsters. It's fair to say. So it's it's brought that back to me. But yeah, I read it a few months ago, and that was, I thought, yeah, definitely you can definitely see where your horror influences and your darker style would be completely different to the new Doctor Who, so to speak. Next question. The Secret Life of Dion P. Nash is read by Sophie Aldred, who was the final companion in the original Doctor Who TV show. What inspired you to contact her, and how did you feel when she agreed to narrate it?
Oh, well, it was absolutely fantastic when she agreed to. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was like, "Whoa, we actually got." To us, I don't really know what inspired me. I mean, I've sent a few things out to a few, actresses. Sadly, not all of them have been able to do it for various reasons. But yeah, no, I hit it lucky with Sophie, and she's actually doing another one. She's doing it'll be uploaded not this week or the week after, but the week after that. It's a 14-parter that she's done for me, called The Circus Family. Yeah. So that's, I mean, so it all Sophie Aldred will have done 21 episodes of of stuff on my channel. I'm not sure, is that not as many as she was actually in Doctor Who for? I don't know. No,
Yeah, I just think that's incredible. I really do.
12 episodes per season, yeah. So, but still, yeah. I mean, it was. I mean, she was very, very. I've not actually spoken to her though. It's all just been through her agent. But I mean, I did meet her like 10 years earlier at a convention. But yeah, no, she's been very good with it. It's it's just been an incredible experience. I'm so glad that Sophie's brought my characters to life. I mean, that is quite a good link with the original Doctor Who, I guess, that I've got now.
Yes, some years ago I contacted an actress who I'd seen in an ITV show, who I could instantly tell, in my opinion, was particularly talented. Played a very flawed character, but a sort of a very funny one, a very sort of foolish one, but it was a very sort of, played all the different facets. And I wrote, and through an agent, she said she'd like to, appear in anything I did, which was, she's got a reputation for being, a very pleasant and approachable person, but that was particularly appreciated because,
wow,
as you know, a lot of the time you don't hear anything back, and people are very busy. I understand that, but it is great to get that encouragement. And but for yourself to get so much work from someone, and and it is somebody who you wouldn't have grown up with heard the show in quite the way I did, I imagine, but obviously you were still just as much a fan of.
Well, I mean, to be honest, the McCoy era was very important to me because I was a 90s baby. I was born in 1991, so that was kind of the current era. And I can remember the first Christmas actually I can remember is watching Remembrance of the Daleks and just being absolutely enthralled by it. So I mean, it's quite a funny feeling to think, wow, one day she would actually be doing one of my characters. So that's a brilliant feeling.
Yeah, sounds like she pretty much do whatever you put her way. She obviously connects with the material, I guess. The next question. I know you're a fan of singers such as Paloma Faith and the late Amy Winehouse.
It's come up.
How influential have they been on your work?
Oh, well, very. I mean, there's lots of characters that are based on them. The one that Sophie is going to be doing, the Circus Family, there's a character loosely based on Amy Winehouse and another loosely based on Paloma Faith. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't want those characters to just be complete copies of them, because obviously, you know, you want them to be their own thing. But I'd say that they're inspired by those women the same way that, you know, Spike was inspired by Sid Vicious and Johnny Rotten. It's like you wouldn't say he was just a complete, you know, XP or whatever of them, but like obviously that's where the kind of basics of the character began. I mean, lots of ones have done that, like, you know, Lucifer in the Neil Gaiman comic, he was based on David Bowie at first. I think it's actually quite a long tradition that people tend to base. And also John Constantine was inspired by Johnny Rotten, I believe, in Sting. Visually, he was based on Sting. So there is actually a long tradition of people doing that. So I figured, why not, you know, do that with my favourite singers? And no offence, but I think my favourite singers are more interesting people, like for better or for worse, if you know what I mean. Like, there's
Amy
a lot of
Winehouse
baggage.
She's one of those people that's just interesting to everybody in some fashion, regardless of their musical interests, whether they were part of that scene.
Oh yeah.
Whether that was kind of, they see it as a peak. You know, someone like myself has different musical interests, but everyone is still always talking about her, and that was before the biopic came out. There's something about her life and the way it was all kind of, it was played out, but it wasn't played out in a sort of narcissistic way, was it? It was just a genuine interest. Just seemed to know that this was someone who was really, you know, like the old soul singers that had these, you know, troubled lives. You know, it was almost a throwback to that, but in a kind of in a way that, I suppose the nearest person at the time was probably someone like Pete Doherty. But obviously he's still with us, isn't he? But I mean, there was a lot of, there's something about her that's a magnetic personality.
I mean, absolutely. And that's what I was thinking, like, you know, if they can use Sting, I mean, no disrespect to Sting, I don't think there's anything wrong with him, but obviously, like, I mean, it's to his credit in a way. It's like he just kind of went off and had a normal life, if you know what I mean. Whereas, as you say, with Amy, there's a sense of tragedy. There's the fact that she was quite, like, inspirational for a lot of women, because, you know, she obviously did get a lot of misogynistic abuse. But then there's also the fact that she's quite vulnerable. I mean, there's all these things that you can sort of draw on. I mean, even little things not everybody knew, like the fact that she was such a softie around wee kids, despite the fact that you would not think that from looking at her, like, you know, for 2 minutes. There's all these kind of things that I could use from a character, but obviously take it in my own direction. But so yeah, I figured, you know, why not follow that tradition and use it for my own characters as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You know, you're taking her as an inspiration and different parts of her personality and experiences, and I suppose it's a mixture of adding in other ones and whether they're taken from real life or they're sort of embellished. But yeah, the next question. Having read some of your work, I sense a mix of strong female sassy humour and self-awareness, which Buffy and obviously Joss Whedon, I think, was the one that really brought that into becoming a popular cultural phenomenon. Have Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel in particular influenced your work?
100%. I would go as far as to say that those two shows together are probably the most important to me, alongside Classic Who. I mean, and along with my interest in dinosaurs, I think those three things really shaped my life in terms of making me someone who was really, really obsessed with sci-fi and fantasy and horror, and obviously the supernatural as well. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I will say as well that, like, with Joss Whedon, I think he's one of these ones. I know he's persona non grata now. I mean, to be fair, because he actually did do some nasty shit. But, you know, like, apart from that, if you separate the art from the artist, I don't think there's really anyone from my generation that's not inspired by him. I mean, even if they didn't watch Buffy or Angel, they're probably inspired by shows that he inspired, like, say, Supernatural or something like that. I mean, he's just got such a wide influence, such a wide range on people. So, yeah, I mean, obviously I'm going to be inspired by his work. I think he really is the one for our generation, to be honest.
Yes, I remember I got into Buffy. It was probably past the original sort of explosion of interest, but there's something about the characterization and the how the characters were developed over the course of the series, and it's something that you and I think, have agreed on in the past, is character development. I've never known a showrunner who is as good at doing that, whether it was in Angel, the TV show, or in Buffy. And unfortunately, his shorter series didn't really get the opportunity to do it. But characters like Spike or Faith or Willow, although I never was quite sure if I went with the whole Dark Willow thing as much as some people. But
I'm a bit unsure of that too, because of what happened with Tara.
Yeah.
I mean, I did like seeing her go nuts. That was cool. But what we had to get there, was a bit. I agree with that.
Yeah, and that's what inspired me, I think, as much as anything. With that was not only did you have very good actors in the roles, like James Masters as Spike, but they were given so much to do. They were given so much material to get their teeth into. The redemption and stuff like that is it's not many shows handled it as well as Joss Whedon did.
Oh no! I will say, not to name drop, I've actually met James Masters.
Yes, I thought you had. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's an awesome guy. Don't worry about that. He's not a prick. Don't worry.
Yes. No, I've heard he's one of the good guys. Next question: what do you think of the current state of entertainment, and what are you currently watching?
Well, to be honest, I'm not one of these people that thinks, oh, there's nothing good now. I think there's always good stuff. You just kind of have to look for it, maybe a bit harder. I mean, I will say I do think music currently doesn't really have much going for it. I mean, there's obviously plenty of talented people out there, but what I mean is there's not really a kind of movement, if you know what I mean. Like, again, when I was young, there was that wave of really offbeat, eccentric female singers. I mean, and before that, you obviously had things like grunge rock, punk, reggae. I mean, there was no end. And there's not really been anything like that for quite a while. So I think music's maybe a bit stagnated. But no, in terms of TV shows and films, there's plenty of stuff that I still love. I mean, just a few weeks ago, actually, I had a rewatch of The Umbrella Academy, which I think is actually a really good show. I mean, it's a bit soapy, if you know what I mean. So I don't know if you're tired of that, you might not like it. But no, that's a really good, solid show. I really liked Disenchantment as well. It was another animated series. And yeah, I mean, there's lots of good stuff. You just have to know when to look. Oh, sorry, Rick and Morty is another one. I mean,
Yes.
I just got into that recently as well. That's been around for so long. I don't know why I didn't bother with it, but yeah, it was like maybe not last year, but the year before I finally got into it. And Rick and Morty, I mean, it's just so hilarious and so fucking insane. I could watch that forever. So yeah, I don't think that we're in such a bad time as people say, but I do agree that a lot of the old franchises are being shat on and mistreated to a far greater extent. It's like, actually, it would be better if we gave a lot of them a rest. Doctor Who, Star Trek. I mean, there's no denying Doctor Who, especially, that they've been shat on from a great height. So yeah, that's a bad trend that we need to stop.
Well, Star Trek. It's an odd one, isn't it? Because when the Kelvin trilogy came out, I think I saw the is it 2009 film?
Yes, 2009.
Yeah, and I did quite like it at the time because I thought that Leonard Nimoy, the way they worked the older and the younger Spock into the narrative was quite clever, and the plot was quite. They clearly thought about the whole sci-fi aspect of it rather than just being a sort of big runaround. But there are other elements of it that I didn't think suited the original show's tone and style. And then it just seemed like the later ones, the two more recent, definitely went for the more kind of hyperactive feel.
I think they were. I agree with that, but I'm just saying I think that they were all badly miscast, except for Carl Urban, who played Bones.
He was exactly. Yeah,
Carl
completely agree.
He's a great actor. I mean, I remember him when I was young on Xena, and he was so good on that. they actually had him play two roles, even though it was the most obvious thing. There was like two big recurring characters who had nothing to do with each other. It was Cupid and Caesar, but like obviously they just didn't care. They thought, oh well, it's a cheesy show and he's good, so that's how good he was. But yeah, and he really I think worked hard to make his version authentic, but did bring something new to it. Whereas the others, I don't mind them as actors, but I thought Chris Pine was way too conventional and too much of a kind of jock. And Zachary Quinto, I think he was too sinister, to be honest. He didn't have any of the light, but it's like Chris Pine was too light and Zachary Quinto was too heavy. There was none of the kind of witty stuff with Spock. And Simon Pegg, what the fuck was that casting about?
Well, yeah, it's interesting because Leonard Nimoy, he's, as you say, he's got a gentler side of Spock, a kind of benevolence, which made, when you see him in things like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the remake, which I still think he's, stands the test of time brilliantly. The was it 78 around then it was made?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and I got the impression they played on, you see, oh look, it's Leonard Nimoy, he's gentle, he's learned, he's a professor, isn't he? And he's sinister, and yeah, in a strange way, because Zachary Quinto had been on Heroes and been playing an initially sinister character. I think that people thought, he's got that sort of otherworldliness that Spock has. But yeah, it was odd, wasn't it? Because he was very cold, but equally he could lose his temper really quickly, because all it took was a bit of taunting by Kirk, and he ended up like losing his rag in 30 seconds. So yeah, I've always felt the tone of the show was very, just again unrecognizable from the old films, and particularly the old TV shows.
Definitely. And I will say, I think Cumberbatch, what the fuck kind of casting was he as Khan? I mean, okay, he wasn't as bad as some of the new masters, but still, I mean, what the hell? Why did they cast him as Khan? And oh god, that movie was just so unoriginal. It was like, hey, let's repeat that scene, but this time Kirk's the one on the inside. It was like, oh god, that's how bereft of ideas they were.
Yeah, it is a tricky one. It's fan service. They often say, was it somebody said on YouTube, somebody who puts out some very good videos about it's like jangling keys in front of a baby sometimes, isn't it? It's like, look, okay, look, you like this? Oh, look, that's a nice reaction. But
yes.
the trouble is, it doesn't always stack together as art, does it? Because if you're just sort of having one set piece after another. I mean, there was one of the Star Trek films had a scene where there was a slapstick scene where the aliens were like little and they were jumping all over Kirk at the beginning and making, it was all played for just slapstick comedy. And then it went straight into a scene which was copied from The Wrath of Khan, I think, originally, where I think Kirk and Spock and maybe McCoy had been talking about getting older. But in a film where people are behaving like they're 50 years old and worried about aging and things like that, and have been actually behaving like that, then that works. But if you've got a scene where people are behaving like they're sort of teenagers, and then you go straight into a scene where they're saying, "Oh, we're getting old," it feels like scenes from the two different films. That was what I felt anyway.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I will say with the third Star Trek film, the one that Simon Pegg wrote, that was so boring. I actually fell asleep during it. I mean, I will say, it's kind of like, I like Simon Pegg, to be clear. I've been a big fan of his since I was a child. But it's like, why was he given? I mean, in a way, it's kind of like Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I mean, I've not seen her stuff like Fleabag. I know you hated it. But I'll play devil's advocate here, and I'll say that maybe her stuff is good to, certain people. I'm not the audience, whatever. But again, it's like, why were Simon Pegg and Phoebe Waller-Bridge given big adventure films to write, like Indiana Jones and Star Trek? It's like, just because they did good sitcoms and would you have trusted Rick Mayall to write a Bond movie? It's like, of course not. They're two completely different things. I mean, that's probably funny.
I think there's always been that tendency, isn't there, in entertainment? I mean, a number of times I remember back of the BBC, with they would go right back. They'd go, well, people like this presenter, like newsreader or whatever. Oh, let's have them do a dance show. Let's have them do a quiz. Let's have them do And so even going back before social media, there's been this tendency to say, right, someone's seen as talented, and let's just give them everything, absolutely everything. But Rick Mayall, I mean, I look back at Blackadder Goes Forth. I was watching a few weeks ago, and he was a uniquely talented comic actor and writer. He was wonderful, wasn't he? But as you say, would you have him down to write a serious action film or a sort of a tortured epic?
No, I mean, what would he know about writing that?
Would he?
Yeah, no, he wouldn't have that. But I'm just saying, it's like that's why it's like getting Simon Pegg. I mean, okay, Simon Pegg does have a bit of a background in sci-fi, but even then, totally different thing. Writing something like Paul, it's a bit of a send-up, and writing an actual sci-fi movie. I mean, by the same logic, like a good sci-fi writer wouldn't necessarily be able to write a great comedy. I mean, you've seen Terry Nation's attempts at comedy, like in The Chase, remember, when there's that Peter Purvis guy. It's an absolutely awful moment. So that shows you, like, he couldn't write comedy to save his life. So, but that's the point. He wasn't, like, given comedy. He stayed within his element. But I'm fed up of these ones like Phoebe Waller-Bridge and Simon Pegg. Again, are perfectly good, but who are just kind of pushed into everything because of the flavour of the month. I mean, it's actually bad for them as well, because then when they're out of their comfort zone and they don't know what they're doing, they become these hate figures who sunk, these big franchises.
Yeah, exactly. You look at things like Star Wars and you think it's, I remember growing up with that, watching all 3 films in the cinema, one after the other, in one day as a kid, and it was just a wonderful experience. And it makes me quite sad now to see, as some people online have said, who've kind of got a slightly ambivalent view of the more recent films and the prequels as well, for that matter. It's a shame when the fun goes out of things and everyone kind of, I think people, they're disappointed by the way things go, but then they sort of go in with a massive checklist of what it should be. But equally, sometimes things just change, and you kind of look back and you think it changed beyond recognition. The final question, as I've kind of intimated through this interview, I really admire your can-do attitude with approaching actresses and all the videos you got on your site, and the way you happily agreed to this interview. What advice would you have for any other young writer who's just starting out?
Well, I would say first things first is obviously get a big back catalogue, because that really can help you out when you're approaching actresses, approaching people. Because I will say the thing with Sophie was I actually sent her 2 stories to see which one she could do, and she ultimately settled for the Dion P. Nash one. The other one was the Trials of Ching Kwan, which I can kind of see why she went for Dion, because that is definitely more in her element. I mean, it is about female singers, and also it's about time travel. It's about basically a vulnerable young woman who is mysteriously dragged through time to another world where she has to fight monsters and aliens, and then gets picked up by a strange time traveler who manipulate her behind her back. I wonder why Sophie Aldred, felt a connection with that. But the other one was a kind of Bruce Lee pastiche. So I mean, it's like, I'm sure she did a good job, but it's kind of like, obviously I can see why that didn't really interest her. Why she was like, yeah, I'll go for this one. So again, the fact that I had 2 stories there, if I'd just say written one, I might not have even got Sophie Aldred, but the fact that I was able to kind of come at her and say, what about this one? Would you want to do this one? Would you want to do? That was, I think, why I was able to get her in, if you know what I mean. So, and that's definitely something that I would recommend. I mean, not everyone can do that, obviously, and that they might not have the time, you know, I did have a lot of time on my hands, but if you can, devote as much time as you can to it, and really, you know, and don't be afraid to take a plunge as well.
Exactly. No, it is impressive. If you say to people that you've written a book and then you show it them, they look at you with a new respect. And if you, as you say, if you go to them and it's not just, well, I wrote a book and it was all about me and I'm wonderful and you know, everybody else is terrible because I'm misunderstood. if you present them a book like that, then it's like that's the only thing. But you know, you've clearly shown when you went to her that you had different interests, different styles of writing and angles of and characters. So you clearly had a lot of things that you could write. So she knew that you were taking it seriously.
Yeah, definitely. That's another thing as well. Also, I will say, I mean, obviously it'll be different for everyone, but I think if you're looking for feedback, it's better to do it online. Because I will say, I mean, because I'd written so much, some parts of Dion P. Nash were a bit first drafty, and we did talk it over. I mean, I didn't actually talk over with Sophie. It was like with her agent. Certain parts had to be amended in certain things, and there was maybe the odd mistake, and that definitely led to improving it. But here's the thing: I don't think if it's your family that you're showing it to, or even your friends, that they'll always give you exact constructive criticism. And to us, it's kind of a hard position to put your family in, because it's like, you know, how can they be objective, really? I mean, on the one hand, like, they're not going to want to hurt your feelings, but on the other, they might, you know. So, and I mean, again, to bring up Rick and Morty, I often think of that. Have we seen that wonderful episode where the guy makes Morty listen to his screenplay? Like when Morty goes into the house, and then it's like he makes him, it's like 3 hours, and it's like they're sitting right in front of each other, and Morty's like, you know, mortified, no pun intended, because he's like, it's awful, and he's having, oh, I think that was good, yeah. And then it's like, as soon as he gives him a tiny bit of constructive criticism, the guy throws him out into the streets. So I mean, I don't think you should ever really do things like that. I mean, by all means, share it on your Facebook page and share it on like forums, because I don't think that's the same, because you're not actually going up to people and saying, what did you think of it? What, you know, but like if they click on it, then that's another view, and you want as many views as you can, you know, because it does beef up your videos where they'll be shown and stuff. I mean, I'll often share things on Facebook or on my forums as many times as I can. And as I said, I don't expect my loved ones to have read them and say you're amazing, but I hope that they click on it just for like a minute or so that it gets, you know, like a view of that. So that's another bit of advice I'd recommend.
Yeah, it's all about bumping up the numbers. Yeah, that's that's it. Because wanted to get the, you know, yeah, it just becomes like a spider's web going out, isn't it? I think. Right. Well, thank you very much for your time this evening. I really enjoyed that. And I'll put this up and I'll enclose links to your work and site. Thanks, Joe. Have a lovely evening. And I hope anyone who sees this has enjoyed watching it and can leave me any comments, of course. And see you soon.
You too. Bye.